here we are again. I'm Dr. Bruce Metzger, moving with you through the book of Revelation. With the 6th chapter, the main action of the book may be said properly to begin. Today's lesson, extending from chapter 6 to the end of chapter 7, is intended to bring before the reader not only the struggle of the church amid conflict and persecution, but also the judgments of God upon the church's enemies. The literary form of these chapters is typically that of an apocalypse. This type of literature first appeared about the year 250 BC and continued well into the opening centuries of the Christian era. Now, a characteristic feature of such works involves a contrast between the present world and a coming future world. Apocalyptic writings seek to provide hope for God's people by disclosing a predetermined plan of events currently taking place and those that are about to unfold. An obvious and often puzzling characteristic of an apocalypse is its extensive use of symbolism. Symbolism involving numbers, strange beasts, cosmic catastrophes. Although the key for understanding some of the symbols in the book of Revelation has been lost, in other cases, a comparison with prophetic symbolism in the Old Testament sheds light on the intended meaning here. The vision of the 4 horsemen begins when the Lamb, who has already taken the scroll from the right hand of the one seated on the throne, now opens successively the 7 seals. The first 4 openings form a series. Marked by common features, each of these 4 is preceded by an utterance from one of the 4 living creatures, and followed by the appearance of a horse and its rider, whose significance is partly explained. But there are also many puzzling aspects. Listen to the very brief account of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. I saw the Lamb open one of the seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures say, with a voice of thunder, "Come." I looked, and there was a white horse. Its rider had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer. When the Lamb opened the 2nd seal, I heard the 2nd living creature call out, "Come." And out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth, so that people would slaughter one another, and he was given a great sword. When the Lamb opened the 3rd seal, I heard the 3rd living creature cry out, "Come." I looked, and there was a black horse. Its rider held a pair of scales in his hand, and I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the 4 living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a day's pay, and 3 quarts of barley for a day's pay, but do not damage the olive oil and the wine." When the Lamb opened the 4th seal, I heard the voice of the 4th living creature call out, "Come." I looked, and there was a pale green horse. Its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed with him. They were given authority over 1/4 of the earth to kill with sword, famine, and pestilence, and by wild animals of the earth. Notice how brief and compact this account is. Each of the 4 scenes is like a cameo, very small, compact. None of the 4 horsemen says a single word. Each rides forth in silence. We do not know in which direction they ride, because the Greek word that has been traditionally translated "come" may also be translated "go." Do they ride from heaven to earth, or from one place on earth to another place on earth? What's the significance of this vision given to John of the 4 horsemen? Well, one of the features that distinguishes the book of Revelation from other books of the New Testament is the fact that Its author attempts to show how power fits into the divine scheme of things. John begins with the belief that all power comes from God. God is absolute ruler of the world. But when God gave humankind free will, God had to allow for the possibility that we might misuse the portion of power entrusted to us. When this happens, however, it does not mean that God is helpless and frustrated. The world is still God's world and is still ruled in accord with the eternal laws of right and wrong. Now, the way that God's power is shown in the world is that the misuse of power brings on suffering and disaster. Wars, starvation, devastation, these are the means by which it's made plain that power abused is still under God's control. These are the judgments of God, working out on the plane of history. Bearing this in mind, we can approach more sympathetically this chapter with its succession of terrible calamities. First, there's the white horse. Its rider holds a bow, and he goes out as a conqueror to conquer. This is no doubt an allusion to invasion. The second horse is red, the color of blood, symbolizing war and bloodshed. The third horse is black, symbolizing death, perhaps because the darkness of the underworld. The rider holds a pair of scales in his hand, and John hears a voice saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, a whole day's pay, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, a whole day's pay." A denarius was the customary wage for an ordinary laborer for 1 day. Usually a denarius could purchase 8 or 16 times more grain than the amounts mentioned here. In other words, after warfare, there comes inflation and famine. The fourth horseman is death, riding a horse, pale green, the color of decaying flesh. Hades, the ruler of the dead, follows close behind. Notice that these disasters are the results of the working out of God's righteous laws for the universe. God does not approve of famine and death and hell, but they are what must follow if people persist in opposing God's rule. God wills community, which is a result of love. Ignore physical laws like stepping off a cliff, disaster follows. If we neglect moral laws, the disaster ensues just as surely. The woes described here are the result of not taking seriously God's command to achieve community and justice. God does not will the woes, but as long as we are free agents, God allows them. So the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse are brilliant little vignettes of God's judgments working out in history. This is what happens in the sphere of politics whenever men and women oppose the will of God. And this is what happens in the military sphere. This in the sphere of economics. Well, with the opening now of the 5th and the 6th seals of the scroll, the action shifts from earth to heaven. During a previous verse, when the Lamb of God was praised by the heavenly host, the 24 elders were seen holding golden bowls full of incense. We were told that the bowls were the prayers of the persecuted Christians for divine aid. Now, as the Lamb breaks the 5th seal, the souls of these martyred Christians are under the altar in heaven, crying out for a divine vengeance upon those who had shed their blood. They are told, however, that they must wait until God's appointed time. Meanwhile, with the breaking of the 6th seal by the Lamb of God, God's punishments of the wicked are resumed. In the description of these, John makes use of symbolism drawn from many parts of the Bible. The earthquake from the book of Haggai, the sun turned black and the moon turned to blood from Joel, the stars fallen from heaven like figs from a fig tree from Isaiah, the sky rolled up like a scroll also from Isaiah, and the rulers of the earth hiding. Everyone calls upon rocks and mountains to fall upon them, as in Hosea, for they know that the wrath of God and of the Lamb is about to break forth upon them for their oppression and persecution of the Christians. Now, between the opening of the sixth and seventh seals, there's an interlude of two visions. These provide assurance that God's people are secure from the plagues and the judgments. 4 angels at the 4 corners of the earth are seen holding back the devastating 4 winds of the earth, causing a temporary suspension of the plagues. Then another angel is observed flying from the east, bearing the seal of the living God. Now standing before him are 144,000, 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes of Israel. The 12 tribes symbolize the new Israel, the Christian church. Each individual is marked on the forehead with a seal. The idea of the king's seal would be very meaningful to the East. The signet ring worn by Eastern kings was used to authenticate documents as official and to mark the personal property of the king. So when the 144,000 were sealed, the seal was a sign that they belonged to God, were under the power and authority of God. They are thus protected from the plagues that are to be inflicted upon their persecutors. The explicit number, 144,000, symbolizes completeness. Not one of the redeemed is missing. Now, in the second part of his vision, John sees a great multitude that no one could count, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. They are robed in white. They are carrying palm branches, denoting that they're victors. The 2 parts of the vision are correlative. In the first, the concourse can be counted. In the second, it's incalculably great. In the first, it's drawn from the 12 tribes of Israel. In the second, from every nation. In the first, it's being prepared for imminent peril. In the second, it's victorious and secure. One of the elders identifies the multitude clad in white as those that have come out of the great ordeal. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. These words, taken literalistically, are paradoxical. Washing a garment in blood does not make it white. On the other hand, the words convey the symbolism that is consistent throughout the New Testament. The blood is a symbol of the sacrificial death of Jesus Christ on the cross. While the benefits of redemption are provided by Christ, the redeemed also have their part to play. They washed their robes. What John brings us here with startling and paradoxical symbolism is put by the Apostle Paul in more prosaic language. Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who is at work in you, enabling you both to will and to work for his good pleasure. The chapter ends with words that have brought comfort and consolation to millions. There is no music lovelier in the ears of those who've been bereaved than the closing promise. They will hunger no more and thirst no more. The sun will not strike them, nor any scorching heat, for the Lamb at the center of the throne will be their shepherd, and he will guide them to springs of the water of life, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Finally, the redeemed are said to serve God day and night within His temple. Life with God is not pictured here as one of ease and idleness. It's one in which the service begun here on earth reaches its highest fulfillment in heaven.